When authors do battle, they do it with words. They throw a story back and forth, each trying to write the other into a corner. The results can be terrifying, or they can be legendary. The challenger, representing the villain this week, is.
Hi, I'm Simon Canton, author of The Bite on the End of the Line and Shiny New Swindle.
And the defender, representing the hero, is.
Hi, I'm Chrissy Moss, author of Small Bites. Now, let's turn off the lights and tell the story.
Defender, choose your genre.
The genre is fantasy.
Challenger, choose the hero.
The hero is Melody Moran. She's a milkmaid from the village of Evertomley on Woad. She's 30 and has never been married due to her being just too smart for the village boys.
Defender, choose the time period.
The time period is Renaissance. The world is just awakening to the possibilities of science.
Challenger, choose the villain.
The villain is Earl Colton Smythe, the Earl of Pembleton, of which Evertomley on Woad is one village. He's 16, the youngest son of the former Duke. All of his 6 older brothers met with mysterious accidents and died. Earl Colton is rumoured to have made a pact with the devil.
Defender, what special skill does the hero have?
Melody Moran, having been a milkmaid for much of her life, did not realize that she had the magical ability to command any animal to do her bidding. After all, she was the best milkmaid in the area.
Challenger, what's happening at the start of our story?
Earl Colton has just arrived in Evertomley on Woad on his way to the King's Court. He stops off for the night at the local inn with all of his retinue. Melody is at the inn after a long day with the cows. She's enjoying a mug of mead with her friend Charity when the Earl comes in. The Earl and his retinue take a table and order food. The Earl keeps staring across at Melody. "You just might end up the wife of an Earl," Charity whispers. After their meal, the Earl and his retinue go to their rooms. One of the Earl's footmen comes over to Charity and Melody. He tells Melody that the Earl would like to see her in his chamber. Melody says that it would be proper for her to go alone and insists that Charity come too. The footman agrees. He leads them up the stairs. As they pass over the threshold of the Earl's chamber, however, someone throws sacks over their heads. They are wrestled to the ground, bound, gagged and blindfolded. When Melody's blindfold is removed, she sees that she's in the village church. She can see that the cross has been turned the wrong way up. Charity is nearby, similarly bound to a pew.
Melody, having been born and raised in a small town, had no idea of the significance of an upside-down cross, but she understood the ropes and the screams of her friend well enough. When Earl Colton pulled out a long steel dagger and advanced toward Charity, Melody's blood turned to ice. She screamed at the top of her lungs for help. Any help, someone's help, save them! Above them, in the rafters of the old church, something stirred. Earl Colton stopped his advance on the young beauty and looked up. 2 glowing red eyes stared at back. Melody continued to scream, unaware that her cries for help had been answered. From the rafters, the sound grew louder. Then the 2 red eyes blinked out of sight, only to be replaced by several more sets strung around the upper rafters of the church. The bats descended upon the Earl, buffeting him with their wings and ripping into him and the henchmen with their claws and teeth.
Earl Colton and his guards run from the church, pursued by the bats. Melody struggles against her bonds and manages to wriggle one hand free. She unties herself and then unties the shaken Charity. From outside the church, Melody can hear the Earl's men shouting. As she gets up, the doors of the church burst open. Melody turns and sees the local priest, Father Tyrell Cosgrave. Father Cosgrave strides into the church with a dozen of the village men at his back. "What is the meaning of this, Melody?" Melody is distracted by the priest's wild hair and bloodshot eyes. He seemed to have just been pulled out of bed and thrown into his cassock. Father Cosgrave's gaze travels to the upside-down cross on the altar, and he gasps, "Witchcraft!" At the doors of the church, Earl Colton re-enters, covered in bites and scratches. "She led us here, and then commanded the beasts to attack. She's a witch, and she should burn."
Melody thought quickly. The Earl had more authority than she would, as a lowly milkmaid, and Charity was too distraught to be of any help. Would it matter to Father Cosgrave what she said? And how did all of these men get here so quickly? Clearly the father had just been pulled out of bed, but what of the other men? Dressed in a wig, their hair neat and tidy? Were they working with the Earl? She helped Chastity to her feet and shoved the crying girl behind her. "We're the victims here," she said, her eyes flashing with a stubborn fire. "Someone shoved a sack over our heads, tied us up, and brought us up here." Earl Colton stepped forward, a sword in his hand. "Don't lie, little witch. We have you dead to rights. You'll burn for your transgressions." Melody pushed Charity behind her, up behind the altar. The girl's sobs growing louder as it seemed there was no way out. "If I'm a witch," Melody said, "and sent the bats after you, then maybe the rats will get me out of this now." The floor opened up beneath them, and the girls fell into a chamber. Rats scurried along the floor above them, near a trap door.
Melody scans the dark room they've landed in. It's the church crypt, filled with sarcophagi. On the far side of the room, Melody spots a set of stairs leading up towards the rear of the church. She drags Charity with her, out of the crypt and into the graveyard at the back of the church. Glancing back through a window of the church, she sees Father Cosgrave and the other men on top of pews, trying to avoid the rats. Earl Colton, however, is fighting them. His heavy boots and the greaves on his legs protect him from the bites as he stamps on the rats. Melody feels a twinge of pain every time his heavy boot meets a rat's soft body. Whether real or sympathetic, she doesn't know. She just knows that she and Charity have to get out of there. She runs through the graveyard and out onto the main road. Charity follows her numbly, her legs seeming to move under their own power. "Charity, you have to help me," Melody says. "We need to get through this together. The Earl is going to come after us now with even more men. Can we go to your family's farm?" Charity draws back, her eyes wide. She shakes her head. "No, not my family." "Where, then?" "The caves," Charity says. "We should go to the caves." Behind Melody she hears the men shouting. The rats distracted them for a while, but they wouldn't keep them busy forever. She leads Charity over to the stables, finds horses and saddles them. Forcing Charity up onto a horse, Melody mounts one herself and they ride from the stable. Earl Colton, meanwhile, is dispatching the last of the irritating rats. He now has scratches on his upper legs to match the ones in his face. "Find those women. They must burn for witchcraft." Earl Colton strides from the church, going back over to the inn. Up in his room, his wife is waiting for him. "Is it done?" Lady Colton asks. Earl Colton shakes his head. "They got away." "The only way to get her power is—" "I know. I'll have hounds out tracking them within the hour. I'll send messengers to every house and hovel. Those women will be known witches wherever they flee. They'll burn and I'll get their power, just like all the others."
Melody and Charity rode for some distance unspeaking. The night was dark, pressing in on them, and it felt like eyes watched them from every tree. In the distance they could hear the rumble of the ocean steadily beating against the cliff sides. As they neared the cliffs, Melody wondered if this was really such a great idea. The caves nestled inside the rock face, sometimes flooded during high tides. Other caves were filled with bats and vermin scurrying about on the rock floors. "How did you do it?" Charity asked her. Melody looked up, uncertain what to say. I have no idea. I think it was a coincidence. Twice? First with the bats, then with the rats? Once I would have believed you, but twice isn't a coincidence anymore." Melody chewed her lower lip, contemplating. She knew about witches and their magic, but not much. There were even some covens in the East where witches practiced their arts openly, not in the country where priests fear their congregations forgetting the newer gods, the gods who forbid magic, in favor of much older powers. "If I did it," Melody said, "then I didn't know I could do it. I'm just an old maid that works with dairy cows. Why would a witch put up with that?" Charity, eyes red from crying and hair wild from the wind, didn't answer. She just kept her eyes on the road in front of her, fear pushing her forward. "Look," Melody said, "I don't know why they chose us, but they did, and now we have to figure out how to get out of this. The Earl will have money and men in his pocket to come after us. If it's true and I can get animals to do what I say, then maybe I can use that to help us get out of this, to get us somewhere safe." Charity was quiet for a moment, then squeezed her eyes shut and nodded. Somewhere behind them they could hear hounds baying. Melody looked over her shoulder to see the leaves lit up by passing lanterns held by men on horseback, and hounds announcing their presence. It looks like I'll be testing my new magic very soon.
Earl Colton thrashes his horse with his riding crop, spurring it forward through the dark. His servants hurry their own steeds forward, trying to keep their lanterns high enough to see the way. The hounds bay loudly ahead of them, leading them on into the darkness. "You there!" Earl Colton calls to a nearby man. "Where are they going?" "The only thing up this way is the Moody farm," the man says. "That and the caves." "Who is Moody?" Earl Colton shouts back. "She's an old woman that's been running the family farm since her husband died 10 years past." "Another witch?" Earl Colton asks. "It's a coven." "I don't think she's a witch. She always seemed nice to me," the man says. "They all need to burn," Earl Colton shouts. "Come on, men. Satan's flock rides ahead of us. We must rid the world of this evil." They ride hard. Staring into the darkness ahead of them, Earl Colton can see a dark figure riding. With a shock, he realizes that the figure isn't riding away from them, but towards them.
The shadowy figure approached, and Earl Colton reined in the men waiting, the horses stamping around nervously. A horse and rider trotted between the trees. A tall, stately woman, her long silver hair glowing in the moonlight, sat atop a chocolate horse. She reined him in before the Earl, the horse stamping and swishing its long tail in disapproval. "What is the meaning of this intrusion on my property?" "The other witch," Earl Colton said. "Take her in hand. We'll deal with her once we have the others." Mistress Moody sat straight in her saddle, her eyes flashing with a stern fire. This was no milkmaid to sit back and take the Earl's demands. This was a woman, used to a hard life. Not a single man moved to apprehend her, lest her gaze fall on them. "You dare to intrude on my land, a land which I have worked and tended since the death of my dear husband, and accuse me of being a witch? Who are you?" "I am Earl Colton, and we are after a known witch and her accomplice, Melody Morin, and she fled to your property. Where else would a witch run but back to her coven?" Is that the only evidence you present, that she fled toward my home? Such flimsy evidence would never hold up in a tribunal. And where do you suppose a frightened girl would run when so many men chase her down, with hounds no less? The Earl reconsidered. Most of the men who rode with him lived in the village. It wouldn't be easy to turn them against her. She was too strong-willed to be manipulated. The magic he'd stolen didn't allow for controlling minds, just manipulating things that were already there, making her untouchable. The fact remains, the witches escaped to your land. Step aside so that we can find her, or you'll be taken in for obstruction." She ignored the Earl, and let her eyes settle on the ranks of men behind him. "You would hunt down Melody, a woman you've all known much of your lives? Sam, didn't she help you with your leg when you broke it last year?" A man on the far side of the formation lowered his gaze, shame coloring his face. "And you, Paul, when your wife was dead and buried, and your daughter was sick, who sat by her bed and nursed her to health while you worked to bring in the harvest?" Her eyes swept over the crowd, and those men who were from the village shifted uncomfortably in their saddle. "How many of you has she helped? Cleaned your wounds, set your breaks, watched over your children? And now you would not trust the woman you once trusted with your children?" "She sent rats and bats to attack me," the Earl protested. "She was going to perform a ritual in your church, and you're just going to let some old woman turn you away?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew his mistake. This wasn't just an old woman. She was a founding platform for this village, a strong pillar that their society was built on. And there would be no overturning this pillar without blood or a major spell, something he didn't have time for at the moment. His quarry was getting away. If her performance in the church was anything to go on, her abilities were stronger than he thought. He had to have them. Looking around the group of riders shifting about, unwilling to move, he sneered at them with contempt. "Fine. Sit back in your laurels. The next time a coven comes in and decimates your village, don't come begging for help." He yanked the reins angrily and rode towards the sound of the hounds baying in the distance. 3 lone horsemen followed after him.
Earl Colton gallops on into the dark. His men struggle to keep up with him. As he rides, he strains to see in the dark ahead of him. Then he spots a flicker of someone ahead. 2 horses with riders. "There!" Earl Colton calls. There they are. The hounds swarm in front of Melody and Charity's horses, slowing them. Earl Colton and his men close the gap quickly. As they come alongside Melody and Charity, Earl Colton raises his hand and slaps each horse's rear in turn. The horses' legs stiffen and the horses stop running. The horses seem to be frozen, unable to move any of their joints. Melody slips from the saddle and helps Charity down. She pushes Charity behind her. Earl Colton vaults from his own saddle, an evil grin on his face. He slaps his own horse and it goes stiff. Walking to his men's horses, he slaps each of them in turn, freezing them in place. Now there aren't any animals around for you to control. What about the dogs? Melody asks, reaching out to try and control them. She can't find them with her mind like she did the rats and bats. It's like they aren't there. Earl Colton snaps his fingers and the hounds evaporate into puffs of smoke. You aren't the only one with a few tricks up your sleeve. I've run into others of your kind before. I'm not a witch, Melody shouts. Nothing like this has ever happened before you came along. Are you certain of that? Earl Colton asks. Have animals never done what you asked, without you asking? Have they never calmed in your presence after being agitated? Come with me. Repent of your sins and God will forgive you. You're going to burn me at the stake, Melody shouts. What about your friend? Earl Colton asks. Are you going to let her suffer because of your stubbornness? At least let her leave. You'll let her go? Melody asks. Of course. You're the witch, Earl Colton says. Charity, run, Melody shouts. Charity looks between them for a second and then breaks into a run across the fields. Get her, Earl Colton says. I'll take care of this one. Make sure you don't hurt her, though. She's far more valuable than this one. Earl Colton's 3 men dismount and run after Charity.
2 of the Earl's men circled around to either side of her, the third running after Charity. But the girl had a lead on the man, and her fear and adrenaline were pushing her toward great feats of speed. She had a good chance of reaching the caverns and hiding before the man caught up. Seeing Charity relatively safe, Melody turned her attention to Colton and his henchmen. You're no Earl, she said, her voice utterly calm. You've been crying witch this whole time, but nothing but magic could freeze a horse in their tracks. A wicked grin spread across his face, and he inclined his head in a mock bow. Not that it will do any good. No one will believe you. Why us? She asked. Just you. The girl was a witness, and as an added benefit. But you? I can take your magic from you. Too bad you won't survive the process. Anger flared through Melody. How dare he try to press his will on her? It wasn't enough that every man she'd met thought himself the better and wanted to wed her so he could rule over her. This one wanted to steal what little she had and leave her dead in the process? But how did this magic work? All she did before was ask for help, and help arrived. She hadn't even known the bats or the rats were there until they acted. Maybe the Earl was right. The cows had been unusually docile around her. They seemed to know her wishes before she did something, lining up in a row without the least bit of trouble. Dogs never barked at her. Birds sang to her every morning, sitting on her windowsill so that she could hear them. But what was there out in this field, so close to the ocean? What could possibly save her now? Earl Colton took a step forward, the men behind her doing likewise. But Melody smiled. The smile threw the Earl off, and he hesitated. That hesitation was his undoing. Melody could see what the Earl did not. Behind him, the frozen horse began to shiver, then shake, trying to break free of the spell so it could answer Melody's fear and anger. Seeing it, a spark of hope rose in her. Maybe her magic was stronger. The Earl hesitated just long enough for a hoof to shoot out, smashing into his lower back and splaying him on the ground. The other 2 men jumped, fear smeared across their faces as they realized the girl before them had broken the Earl's spell, but it was too late. Flocks of seagulls, hundreds of the white birds blotting out the sun, pelted the trio with small rocks and dead fish. They dove down, dropping their payload from above, to smack into the ruffians. Dark bruises flowered on their exposed flesh as they raised their arms to try and deflect the blows. From beneath the grass, snakes slithered, their jaws latching on the 3 men. They screamed, their cries rising up above the ocean swells and the cries of gulls above them. Melody stepped forward, her hard gaze falling on the cowering Earl. I'm probably not the first you've come after, but I'll be the last. Kill me, he yelled. Another snake lashed onto his shoulder. It doesn't matter. She'll find you. She'll make you pay for what you did. Before Melody had a chance to stop it, a hoof slammed down into the man's neck. With a loud crunch, his cries of agony stopped. Turning, Melody saw the other horses standing over the still forms of the two henchmen. What did he mean? Who was she? A cry from the cliffs brought her attention back to Charity. The last henchman would be easy enough to take care of. Then she had plans to make. Life was going to get complicated quickly, and she would need to ride north as soon as possible to a coven for answers. Mounting up, she rode to Charity's rescue, her mind already going toward the next piece in the puzzle. The end. Or is it?
Who do you think won the battle? Vote for a winner in the comments below.